There is a thin divide between what is perceived as spiritual and paranormal, for they are forever intertwined throughout time. Traveling within the history of the world, we can find examples of spirituality that involves everything from magic, spirits, gods and goddesses, and seers or people said to be able to speak to the dead. We all have our own belief systems. We all have our own truths. So let us possibly bend those truths a bit with some insights and perspectives that may be a bit different than yours, or even give yourself validation for what you see as true. Come sit with myself and the best of the best in research, teaching, discovery, and practitioners of the day. My name is Bear Medicine Walker, and I welcome you to Spiritually Paranormal. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Spiritually Paranormal, and I am grateful for having the opportunity today to bring on not only a good friend, I consider her a very good friend, but she's a historian, a haunted history buff, and she has written books, and she has amazing insight into many different areas of hauntings in the history and bringing that forward. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Miss Penny Griffiths Morgan. Hi.
Hi. Hi,
welcome. This is kind of cool. I really enjoy this format. If nothing else, the pandemic brought this possibility to a lot of people, and it's really nice to be able to see the people we're speaking with. So welcome.
Well, I can honestly say you're actually in bed with Penny right now, because I'm actually in my bedroom. Because it's the only room in the house I can shut the door so you can't hear my children.
That was probably, yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to leave that one. I'm not going to say a word. Anyway, I'm running down on the bottom of the page. You'll see where you can reach Penny, through this. I'll be putting this up on and off through the show, and we've got a lot to talk about. And Penny was like, what should we talk about? So one of the things, at least I hope she got that message, was we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the haunted things here in comparison to the haunted things over across the pond in the UK. So I thought, what better thing, because Sean and Bex, they want to come over here and do like a cross country type thing, and their big tick was Alcatraz, and I'm like, oh, but there's so many more interesting prisons than Alcatraz to me. And we'll talk a little bit about Alcatraz too, but Alcatraz is that's just kind of like small potatoes compared to, like, I sent you over the West Virginia Penitentiary. That place is...
That one I did a show on it beginning of this year with Wes Coleman and Dave Gibb in Canada. And yeah, I one day I'm going to get there. If I get to Virginia,
well, you come over here and I guarantee you and I will go. I will make it a point to meet you there. I do want to go there. I actually talked to my daughter and future son-in-law into the fact that they want to go. It is the creepiest setting, and the history. Did you pull some of the history? So you did the research if you did a show. So okay,
it's me.
I'm gonna sprinkle the magic so y'all can listen. Penny's gonna give us a little bit on the West Virginia State Penitentiary.
Well, I mean, it's also known obviously as Moundsville, because that's where it actually is. So when I spoke to Wes and Dave, now the interesting about Wes Coleman, for anyone who doesn't know him, he's Canadian, and he's part of a group called COPS. Now, not cops as in police officers, but cops as in correctional officers. He is a prison officer by day. That's his day job. So he has this amazing insight into prisons, and he's been a prison officer since he were a lad. You know, it's a long time, and he's worked in quite a few different category prison. So he has this amazing insight into prison life and into things that will wind up if any spirits that are there. For example, he says you never whistle in a prison, which is something I'd never thought of, because apparently by whistling you're indicating you're happy and the other prisoners won't like it. He said, so if you want to wind spirits up in a prison, whistle. So there's little things like that that his insight, if you like, can give you. Now, he investigated Moundsville with Dave, and they both have some amazing stories to tell me. But from a history perspective, compared to some of our prisons in the UK, it's a baby. I mean, Alcatraz even more so. Moundsville was sort of built around 1876, and it's a very sort of castle-like structure. And it was built to sort of be a very similar structure to, I don't know how you pronounce it, Joliet in Illinois. It was meant to be a very, very similar sort of structure.
Oh, Joliet, yeah.
Thank you. And it's got this whole castle structure. But what's interesting in some of these prisons, when I was looking to see any comparisons between UK designs, American designs, which maybe carried more energy in them, which I'm going to get on to because I did have a thought about that. These ones were done in big, long blocks, like 3 or 4 stories high. Now, you've got somewhere called the Sugar Shack that's in Moundsville, which is like what was the, if you like, the recreation room. Funny enough, when he did
recreation, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, he didn't experience much down there at all. But where he did experience stuff is roughly where Red Snyder's cell is. And one of the things that I wanted to do, apparently Red was a massive Days of Our Lives fan. And I said, well, okay, because my thing is triggers. My second book was all about experiments, and triggers is one of my favorite things to do because it's not disrespectful. It's not expensive because it's your imagination. You think of things that will possibly trigger activity. And I said, well, you need to go in and play the theme music for Days of Our Lives then and see if he wants to watch an episode or watch the latest one and go in and say, well, do you know what's happening? Well, so-and-so's done this and so-and-so's done that. And they were like, we hadn't even thought of that. So top tip, anyone going to investigate Moundsville, swat up on Days of Our Lives, because apparently that's Red's favourite show.
That's awesome.
We don't get it over
really here, cool. That's really cool. And I've actually talked to and then also seen some things that have been shot there where his cell area is really super, super active. But again, what people I don't think understand is when these people go out for the shows and stuff and they might do 3 days of recording and shooting just because you're seeing it all compacted into 45 minutes basically with their commercials and stuff. That might have taken a long time to catch. You just don't go in and I've told this to people, you just don't go in and oh, here's a phone. Here, wait a minute. Put your quarter in and, hey, is so-and-so there? Can you come and play right now? That's not the way it works.
This is one of the benefits I've had from on my podcast that I do, Haunted Histories, getting to talk to a lot of these TV personalities. Even though a lot of them are genuine paranormal enthusiasts, they love what they do. They're not just doing it to earn a buck off the telly.
Right.
And when you talk to them, you talk to people like Ghost Brothers, you talk to people like Tennessee Wraith Chasers, Katrina Weidman, all those, they will tell you, man, we spend like 48, 72 hours in these places to get you 40 minutes of good footage. And whenever I go on these sort of public group investigations and they'll say, oh, what do we expect to see over the next 6 hours? And I went, possibly a cold spot if you're lucky. Don't expect it to be like Ghost Adventures or all these other shows that show you all these amazing places because it's clever editing a lot of that time. I'm not saying these things don't happen to them. I'm sure they do, but it's edited together to make it look like it's concurrent. And once people realize that and also realize that a lot of activity is subtle, it doesn't have to be someone like slapping you across the face and you get a big palm. I've stood there before and felt somebody holding my hand, and then somebody turns around and says, something just brushed past my leg like child height, and then I feel them holding my hand. Little things like that are really, once you open yourself up to it and you allow yourself to think, oh, it's not just I'm feeling a bit weird. Actually, let's see if 2 and 2 makes 4 here. These things, makes it a lot more interesting.
The prisons themselves, and well, this particular prison, like I said, it's on my bucket list because I want to go there. It is set in the mountains, like there. This is what makes this particular prison really interesting. And if people go and look it up again, this is the West Virginia Penitentiary, and it's set like it was built on purpose with 3 sides of sheer mountain. Like, so if people got out, there was one road in and one road out, and that was it. And I don't know your thoughts about it, but, and this is just kind of by a perceptory thing for me, is like, I feel that there's a lot of ley lines possibly under the prison. And I feel that the mountains themselves, with whatever minerals or water they have, like sourcing through them, I feel that that holds a lot of energy. And because this was a particularly violent prison, like,
tense.
yes, that I feel that that energy has been kind of captured. I don't know. That's just my thought.
It's funny you say that, Bear, because I wasn't going to talk about Bodmin Jail in England, in Cornwall. But Bodmin Jails, I investigated there. What was it, last March or the March? I can't remember now. It's all gone. Can't even remember what day of the week it is, to be honest. But Richard Estep was writing a book there, and he came over and he said, "Penny, do you want to come and investigate with us?" And chatting to Kirsten Honey, who is like the sort of resident, if you like, paranormal person who books all the tours and the investigations, I was saying to her, why do you think this place is so active? And it is active. And she said, because the rock it's on, it's got a lot of quartz in it, and we've got water, and the combination of the two, it's like a homing beacon for energy. So it's interesting you said that, but that will bring me on to one of my thoughts I wanted to discuss with you about a certain type of
they give it to me. I can't tell you. They just put it in and it comes out. So
there's something to do with a certain type of prison design I was going to discuss with you. So we'll get on to that. I've got to remember I wrote down the notes of what it was called, this particular prison I want to call, because it's in Spanish, the name, and I need to probably need to put my glasses on to be able to read it.
Oh, that's all right.
Oh, I've got it. I know where it is. Yeah.
I have, you know, it's funny, in water, and that's another thing I don't think, you know, some people know, but not everybody knows. Water is a huge conductor of spirit for people that work with spirit. And I know in the paranormal field, when people have gone into like mines and different things, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I mean, I'm pulling this out of my tiny brain, the West Virginia Penitentiary, I believe, had a water source running underneath it. And I don't remember if that's but I'm pretty sure. That's my bird in the background if you hear her. Yeah, nothing spooky. It's just she likes to get in on stuff. But I have, talking about water, is I live on a lake, right? Yeah. I have always been by water or had to have water with me. I have 5 massive aquariums in my house. And I mean, they're big aquariums. And I've always had to have that. And if I look back in my life, that's the way it's always been. So to me, that's a conductor of spirit. That's a big conductor of spirit. And then you get into a place like these penitentiaries, some of them, and I know some of them over in the UK, it's the same way. They have water running underneath them.
We have a lot of rivers, yeah.
So it's just, I don't think that's coincidence that they pick this stuff up.
Well, the thing is, I was talking to someone about, not so much to do with the prisons and stuff, but to do with the workhouses and why a lot of them were built where they were on really bad land that would flood and bad sewage systems. I think because it was cheap. The land was cheap, and they were trying to keep the expenses down as much as possible, which is why I think with a lot of the prisons, whereas schools, the poor schools, had land donated to them, so it was normally decent land, but the land that the unions had to buy and the local authorities had to buy to build these sort of facilities, they didn't want to spend too much money. They didn't want prime location. So, you know, the sort of land they're going to use probably isn't what you'd want to build, and they wouldn't have, you know, and to have their own water source would have been quite useful.
Yeah. I never thought about it like that. Yeah.
So there's all these different things to sort of, and this is just my observations. It's not necessarily fact. I haven't read any reports from anyone saying we bought that land A because there was a river there, B because it was cheap and nobody would ever want to build a house there. It's just my sort of observations of things. But Yeah, a lot of them, some of them did have running water and had their own water systems, and this is where they used. It's more in the UK, I think they use these than in America. But the treadmill, the sort of thing that literally you see now in a gym, and I think if some of the spirits of prisoners went into local gyms and saw people on these step machines, they're going, hell, that was a punishment in my day, and you're doing it, you're paying to do it.
It's still kind of a punishment.
But the thing is, some of the prisons had the treadmills used to bring the water up. The people would go on the treadmill to pump the water up through the prison.
Yeah, cool.
Now, I know there was one specifically that did this, and for the life of me, I can't remember the name of it because it's only just come to mind. But yeah, so having their own water source would have been very, very useful. And a lot of the prison systems also that I researched were enclosed units. They grew their own food. They had their own farm.
Really? Now that I did not know. That's interesting.
I mean, the one that I was looking at, the two UK ones I thought I'd look at for you were Dartmoor and Lancaster Castle, both very, very different prisons. Very, very different prisons. Now, most of our prisons, when I was looking them up, especially the Victorian era ones, they didn't have that kind of Gothic castle type thing that, say, West Virginia does. They were a lot of them, in my view, almost look like old factory buildings that have been converted.
Well, don't you find it interesting though that it kind of struck me as odd, the West Virginia one, why they built it to look like that?
Intimidating.
I was going to say, is it an intimidation factor?
Because we have got a couple in the UK. I think Leicester and Lincoln are both very, very similar in appearance. The original prisons, Victorian prisons, are very, very similar. That whole Gothic, almost like intimidating fortress castle, and obviously the turrets had a use because they were there to be sort of guard towers and protecting you had that. The whole reason why castles had them, that you could see all the way around, you could see the entrance, you can see the roads coming up. It was a good viewing sort of system, but that wasn't the only design. But it's interesting that a lot of the American prisons I looked at, Alcatraz excluded. Alcatraz is something a bit different.
Yeah, that's a little
the
weird.
older ones, and I'm not talking about the newer designs that you've got now, but the older ones, they had that kind of wanted to look foreboding, wanted to look. But it was also from a viewing perspective, and the fact that they weren't thinking so much about viewing what the prisoners were doing when they were inside their cells. They were thinking more about viewing the walls and the outside. But yeah, Dartmoor prison. I mean, that's a fascinating one, and I'm gonna say a few things that aren't just to do with what's going on in the news at the moment, but I just want to make the point about this. Dartmoor prison was actually built in about 1805 by the actual prisoners, and these were French POWs who built it. But it wasn't actually slave labor. Before anyone says anything, they were actually paid to build it, because beforehand they'd been living on prison hulls, the ships, and anyone knows what a ship's like. It ain't going to be pretty having loads of smelly, like, men shoved
dysentery, everything, disease,
yeah. So they were building Dartmoor prison. Now, originally when they built it as one big block with open dorms, because they were POWs. They weren't criminals. They were POWs. It also then housed a lot of American POWs from 1812.
Oh yeah.
And it was later on, I think it was, I did write the date down. Where have I put it? I can't remember what the date was now, but it was later on that they actually converted it into a normal prison, but they had to convert it completely and put individual cells. But this one just looks like a block. It looks like, if I like to say, when you look up pictures of it, it's beautiful grey, granity type stone. As somebody has said in the comments, that the stone walls hold energy. Yes, they do, but it's also the ground that these places are built on which holds the energy. But a lot of them were built with the same kind of stone because it was what was readily available.
What about the iron? I mean, the iron, because back in the day, I don't think it's much as it's steel in the new ones, but in the old ones, I would think iron would be, and iron is a conductor as well.
Yeah, could be. I guess we don't know. But what's interesting is the different designs. And it was actually a chap by the name of John Howard, who was a prison reformer in the late 1700s, who'd been around the world looking at prisons and was saying, we can't run our prisons like this. We can't have it like 10 men to a tiny little cell, no fresh air, no daylight, no exercise, mixed wings. That was
that's like insane.
women. You'd have violent murderers lumped in with someone who's stolen an apple. You know, he was like, you can't do it like this. You've got to separate them, and that's when the sort of major prison reform started, and they started the whole, well, we do need to have a men's wing, we do need to have a women's wing, we need to have a children's unit, and then they started differentiating between different types of prisoners.
I think the West Virginia prison had a women's, and I could be wrong, but I think they had a women's ring, women's
wing, even.
Wing. Thank you. Because I remember somebody telling me they were up there and they kept getting their butts touched.
Mm-hmm.
The guys did. The girls didn't in the women's wing.
It may not have been a women's wing.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Let's be honest.
Yeah,
and you caught in a storm.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I don't know. I just, they were so well, and again, you know, with what, and I'm gonna put it out there, but not in detail. But like you said, with what's going on in the world right now, I mean, it's like history. You know, if you look back in history, this has always been the process for change. And if you look at some of these penitentiaries, and even some of them over by you, it's not really that long. It's been in our lifetime, I would think, a lot of them that have been closed. So, I mean, they may have been built in the 1800s, late 1800s, but they weren't closed until like late in the 1900s.
If not, I mean, one of the ones I was going to mention about Lancaster Castle, that was only closed in 2011.
Isn't that crazy?
I know.
I mean, and I realize, I get that prison is prison, and back in the day, like when they first opened, you could get tossed in prison and forgotten about for stealing bread.
Yes.
You could get
hanged for stealing.
Yeah, bread. And it's like, it's just like a little, like, I don't know. It's amazing. And they used to take them out and shoot them or hang them right in the front. Like, that was it. Dig a hole.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating thing to look at, and I'll tell you about Lancaster Castle in a minute, because I was watching a documentary on it, because it's been a castle and it's had like 800-900 years worth of history, and I was sitting there with my 10-year-old son, and they were talking about these two young lads, and they were like 7 and 9. They were about to be transported to Australia because they'd stolen sheep, but they were due to be hanged. They were about 7 and 9. They weren't very old at all. And they ended up being transported instead, and ironically set up their own sheep farm in Australia once they were released.
Good for them.
But and made themselves quite successful. Can I just read one of the comments? Julie Gibbard has said she went on a tour to York, and part of it is still a prison. Yes, that's York. What was York Castle? They used to use the dungeons at York Castle because the courts, the assizes, were right next door. But that's when they had to pull the castle down and reformat it, because I think that's the bit you're talking about, because it just wasn't fit for purpose. And if you've ever been in those cells, you'll know why they wouldn't have been fit for purpose. But yes, that's a brilliant place to go and visit. Yeah.
Somebody here is also Kim Garrigus is mentioning the Kentucky State Penitentiary. That's another freaking nightmare.
I've never looked into that one.
Oh, you're going to want to look into that one. That's a really interesting one as well. They're just, you know, for me, and not so much when I look at, and I know you live in the UK, but when I look at the UK prisons and buildings and old things that people go around and investigate, the UK, I expect it, because the UK is, I mean, face it, there's been civilizations over there way longer than here in the US, right? Yeah. So when I see prisons like what we've been talking about, even in Alcatraz, I mean, Alcatraz to a point too, it's like, wow, this is like, we were supposed to be a little more progressive in the 1800s, and it's like we were kind of barbaric. I mean,
I'd say yes and no to that. I'd say I'm a big okay, I'm going to say this without
just say it. It's okay. It's me. I don't care. Say it.
I don't want any of your followers to think I'm this like obnoxious bigot.
You're not.
When you look at what the Victorian era brought in compared to what there was before, you can see progression and development. But what a lot of people tend to do is they look at that and then look at now and don't see where it's gone. They look at then with today's knowledge and eyes. It's a bit like mental health treatment. When every program I watch on asylum saying horrific places, they did electric shock, they did this, they did that, and I'll turn around and go, hang on, they still do electric shock.
Yep.
All right, not as much. Lobotomies still do them, albeit not as much. And people are like, no, it's not the same. It's not. Yes, there was torture in some of these places. Yes, there was horrendous staff working there. But do we not have that now? There's going to be a bad apple everywhere, no matter where it is. So yes, there were things which we look at now, and I wouldn't want to repeat them. Women being able to be put into asylums by their husbands just because they were argumentative. I mean, I'd have been institutionalized years ago if that was the case. You know what I mean? Not these.
They would have had a build me award, I'm sure.
Exactly. Well, another one is women wanting to read and learn too much was one of the reasons a husband could cite. Again, I went through a list once of things that husbands could put their wives into an asylum for in the 1800s, and my husband's going, "You're ticking every single one of these," and I was like, well, "There you go." But the point is, yes, that shouldn't come back. However, the genuine cases, and people look at them and sort of say, this is horrific. It was with what we know now. But as I say,
Not back
100
then,
years forward, they're going to look at how we treated things now and go, oh my God, did they do that? They gave people antidepressants who were depressed. How stupid. If they'd just done ABC, they would have been fine.
Yep.
And this is what I try and explain to people. So whilst the prison system in the 1800s, like being hanged for stealing a loaf of bread, it was the system.
Yep.
You've got to look at the way it changed. Now, one of the ways it changed is people like John Howard coming in and saying, hang on, these people shouldn't be living 10 to these tiny little cells. They should have fresh water. They should be able to get outside and exercise. But one of the things they did bring in, which I find quite interesting, was the whole separatist side of things. Now, that was something they brought in, and I've just completely forgotten the name of the prison, but it's a very well-known one in Philadelphia. It's Eastern State, Eastern.
You're picking the wrong bear. My brain is Swiss cheese.
Mine is right now.
Maybe one of the listeners can put it in if they know.
I think it's Eastern State or something. Katrina Weidman's done an awful lot of stuff there. Eastern. You know the one I'm talking about?
Isn't it the Pennsylvania State Penitentiary?
It could be, but it's got that one anyway. That was one of the first ones they developed using this separatist thing. So people were in one-man cells, which was never been known before, one-person cells, I suppose you could say. But also when they came out of their cells, they weren't allowed to talk. They would have to come with have a mask on. And I was reading a book recently that's got loads of diary entries from people who were in Victorian prisons. And
that would be really interesting.
It's fascinating.
How'd you get your hands on that?
Well, it's a book. It's just it's a book that someone's put together. I think it's by a guy called Neil Story. I've got it on my. It's what I was reading before I came online, and there was this woman she was in a separatist prison, and she said if they heard you speak, you would get punished severely, like 14 days in seclusion, isolation, or whatever. No food for a week or something like that. And she goes, the problem was you'd forget how to speak. You'd forget how to pronounce certain words. She said, so a lot of us would smother our faces to try Eastern State. Thank you, MJ. That is the one. They would try and practice words by smothering their mouths so the wardens couldn't hear them because they'd forget how to speak. Now, the reason for doing this was to do with religion, and they felt that if you couldn't communicate with anyone bar God, that was going to bring you back down to being a good person again. It would also mean that the older lags couldn't corrupt the new ones and teach them stuff. So you can kind of see the logic, although humans need human contact, which the lockdown has shown so many of us. So that was an interesting sort of development. They were trying to improve things. They were trying to find a way. I mean, that was why they had things like the treadmill. And I don't know if you've heard of the crank was another thing they used to make them do. Have you heard of that?
Is that the one they walked around?
No. The crank is literally what it says. It's where the English term for prison officers, the screws, come from. It was literally a crank that they would have to, that they could change the. Again, it's probably something they have in gyms now. they could change the resistance on, and they would be expected to do a certain amount of rotations of the crown.
Oh.
And it was kind of that whole sort of idle hands kind of theory, that if it kept them busy and exhausted them physically, that they would reform themselves. So that there was logic in what they were trying to do for what they knew of psychology and everything else at the time. And a lot of these prisons, they did have, I mean, one of the things Howard was very into was fresh air circulation, because before that, a lot of prisons were suffering, in America as well, was suffering from typhus. It was known as jail fever because it was so prevalent. And it was prevalent because of the lack of sanitary sort of conditions and the lack of fresh air and the lack of sunlight and all that kind of thing. So they were trying to improve conditions, although what we see now would be,
Right.
but then again, they'd probably look at what we have now, when we have small cells with 2 or 3 men in each, going, how can you do that to them? They should have their own room. So there's kind of, you sort of see both sides of it as you start to research into it.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you've been out, you do investigations, you go on investigations with other people, and you've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone on an investigation and picked something up, like paranormally or just from being there and witnessing things that you didn't know about the history, and then we'll be able to go back to it and find it, like within your history? Tell us a little bit about that.
My favorite experience, and this is the one I love telling people, and I was telling a friend recently who's never done investigating, and she said I made her get goosebumps. And I talk about it in, I'm going to plug one of my books now. I talk about it in this. Whoops.
That's okay.
Sorry, not that one. That one. It's in that one. My Haunted History. It was a place called Highlands House in Chelmsford, literally 15 minutes up the road from me. And as anyone knows who does investigating, to have somewhere that at 3 o'clock in the morning when you leave, it's only 15 minutes for you to get home. Amazing. Not that 2-hour drive when you're sort of like this and drinking Red Bull and popping sweets to keep yourself awake. And I knew it had been an SAS headquarters during World War II. So our special forces was headquartered there during World War II. I knew that. Didn't know many of the names, anything. And I was in one of the rooms. It was a public investigation. And it was, they were using like a portal. Now, I'm not a big fan of apps, but I'm one of those people who says, don't write things off, because
they're interesting to me.
They're interesting.
They're very interesting.
No.
Yeah.
So this portal app on someone's phone kept saying Corporal Penny. And I was just like, okay. I hadn't heard it to be. It was somebody else. They keep saying your name. And I was like, does it? I was like miles away. I was actually listening to the REM pod going off that sounded like Morse code.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I said to the box, I said, would you like me to come back on my own? Or me or just a couple of people? Because there was about 20 of us. And it just said yes in the same voice and then went quiet. Okay. So near the end of the night, I went back there with one other person who's also a military historian friend of mine. And we had novelists with us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was about it. And I've slapped myself now for not having a camera on me to photograph the words that came up on the obelisk. That's all I'll say. But I came back and I said, hi, it's Penny again. You wanted to talk to me. And the 3 words that came up on the obelisk was Corporal Terry Knott. Knot. And I was like, okay, Terry, pleased to meet you. Did you die in World War II? Yes. These are actual answers that are coming up. Whereabouts did you die? Europe. And then that was it. Okay. So I've kind of forgotten about it a bit because there were some other things that had happened that night. And a few days later, I decided to look up on the forces records to see if I could find Corporal Terry Knott. Did not expect to find a Corporal John Terence Knott, who died and is buried in Northern Europe, who was part of one of the Marine Commando groups. And if you know your SAS history, the SAS in World War II recruited all of their men from 7, 9, and 11 commandos. The battle, his war record was incredibly vague, not a lot in it at all, which is another thing that sort of rang bells, if you like. And I looked up the battle he died in. It was an SAS battle. Now, yes, I knew about the SAS link. Yes. didn't know this guy's name, certainly didn't know his history, and I can't fabricate those 3 words coming up on a novelist.
I'm telling you, I tell people this all the time. When you're working with spirit and stuff comes through, and I realize, like what you're saying, the portals, and I get that. I can say the same thing about what I do. But when stuff comes through and like I don't even remember it, because when the messages come out, they're gone. They're not for me, they're for other people. So unless I'm able to see it or hear it again, I couldn't tell you what I did, what I said, or anything. But when you have voices in your head that wake you up at 3 a.m. or that say to you, hey, you need to tell that person over there, you need to bring this through. And it's such vague stuff. Like, how would I even know that about a stranger, let alone, you know what I mean? So it's like, I have faith that they're finding whatever ways they need to come through, like with you, because he wanted to be remembered.
And he's mentioned in my book, and I have his service number and everything, so people can look him up if they want to. I had another. I do. Yeah. So that sort of thing does happen. I've never had an event come through that's happened at a place that I didn't know about, because a lot of my, when I go to these places, even if I haven't researched them, my general knowledge, because of doing the shows I do, doing the blogs I do, doing the writing I do, my research is so, I don't just, so for example, researching a prison, I wouldn't just research that prison. I'd go much, much bigger. And that gets reused over and over and over and over. But it's little things like that, like a name. And if a full name comes through, and then I can link it into the place, like logically. I think actually, no, I've got another one that might interest you. It was at Langard Fort. Again, it's in that My Haunted History book. And
before you go any farther, keep that thought. Where can they get your books?
I will mention that.
Okay.
Don't worry. And so Langard Fort. It's in Suffolk, sort of the bumpy bit on the side of the UK. It's one of my favourite places. I fell in love with it the minute I walked in. And this fort's got like 500 years worth of history. It's been some kind of fortification for nearly 500 years. And I was wandering around before the investigation started. And me and this other guy, we were by this room. It had 2 baths in it, like really old baths. I presume it had been a bathhouse in its day.
Yeah.
And as I'm standing there, I heard a shuffling noise on the concrete inside the room. So I went straight in. It's not a big room. I could see everything from where I was standing, see if there was somebody already in there hiding, or if there was an animal trapped or something. Nothing. But as I'm standing there, I heard a male noise, like a exhalation. Well, the chap I was with did a runner. He was so scared. Not the great thing for a paranormal investigator, I must admit. I started chatting. Can I help you?
The men all bail.
Everything else.
The men bail.
Yes, I know Bury St Edmunds very, very well, Julie. I know it very, very well. In fact, there's a place called Rougham Airfield that's very near there that I also mention in the book. And anyway, so I didn't think anything of it. Well, I did. I made a mental note. And I wrote it down in my notebook when I got back to the sort of the break room, and I was chatting to one of the guys who was looking after the fort for us while we were there, and I was telling him, and he went, "Oh, it's interesting. There is a story attached to that room." Now, I hadn't read any of this, any of it. Transpires there is a belief that a World War I soldier either hit his head and died in the bath, or was some kind of hazing and was killed. I didn't know any of that at the time. But this story gets even better. I knew World War I soldiers had been based there, but this story gets even better. Okay, so about 2 or 3 months later, take the whole family there for a day trip. There's a beach near it so the kids can run around. Lots of stairs for the kids to run up and down and tire themselves out, as you do. And I'm just wandering around. I haven't told my youngest son, who at the time was 4, suffers with learning difficulties. I hadn't told him any of this. I hadn't told even my older son a lot of the stuff, because he loves hearing these stories, but I don't always tell him things. And we're walking past this room. And I thought, I'll just walk past it, see if I can feel anything, see if it's constantly there, or if it just was there because he wanted to get a message to me or something. Nothing. To say it felt, there was nothing. Anyway, before I know it, my youngest son, again, who can't really lie that well, especially not at 4, starts waving. And I was like, to
Who
the
are you
room,
waving
right?
to?
And I was like, dude, who are you waving to? And he went, the nice man in the corner. I said, what nice man? And he proceeded to describe a World War One uniform to a T. So I waved goodbye and thank you as well.
But kids can see, that's like kids can see things. And, it's like, and especially nowadays, you either believe or you don't believe. And I really think that a lot of people, it's kind of hard to get them to the believe side of things often. But it's like, they're there. And I just actually, and I'm going to tell you something, and I don't normally do this, but I was just hearing in my head, you were a traveler, and I don't know if you believe in reincarnation or not, but one of the reasons that you do the history is because you've lived so many lives through so many different histories, and that's why you're drawn to it. And that's also why, like when you see things, okay, they see you and they're attracted to you in spirit because they want their stories told. And you are like, I keep getting like, you're dedicated to tell the stories of those that are no longer here. So that's part of the reason that you do what you do. And like I said, I don't know, because I've never talked about reincarnation with you, but that's what I'm being told many
times. It doesn't surprise me, because I've always been told I had an old head on young shoulders, even as a young kid. And I spoke to someone once when I was younger about this, and they said it's because you've had quite a few lives. That's why you've got so much knowledge. And so, yes, it does definitely make sense. But going back to the prisons, I wanted to mention one that I'm dying to investigate in the UK at some point, called Lancaster.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Well, this place, it's been a castle, as you can tell. Actually, its foundations date back to Roman times in Lancaster, which is the northwest of the UK. But it's been a kind of custodial facility for like 800-900 years. It's also associated with the evil King John, British King John, who wasn't a very nice person. It was also where the famous Pendle witches were held and tried, because it was also a courthouse. But Lancaster as a place was known as the hanging town, because so many executions were carried out there.
Layers upon layers upon layers upon layers.
Yeah. Originally all at Gallows Hill, which is why anytime you go somewhere in the UK and you find somewhere that's known as Gallows Hill or Gallows Corner, think about it. But then from, I think it was about 1821, 1822, they decided that hangings should be taking place at the prison, albeit in public, as a public spectacle, but in the public eye. And there's a corner there. And then it wasn't until a bit like 30 or 40 years later they actually started doing them in private in a shed. And what's interesting is it's still a courthouse, and where the jury sits to deliberate a verdict is actually where victims would be before they were hanged.
Yeah.
It's known as the hanging, what did they call it? I wrote it down. The drop room. Not drop room where they dropped into, but where they were before they were taken out into the courtyard. And I bet there's a few jurors who don't realise that. Anyway, so this place was changed into a Victorian type jail, and it was also where they used the separatist theories of people having their own rooms. And I was talking to a few friends of mine who are nicknamed the Spooky Sisters, Pamela and Jeanette Wiley, and that's one of their favourite places. And they were telling me about some of the resident spirits, and we were saying about children being there. Well, sometimes children would go into the prisons with their mothers if they had no one else to look after them.
Right.
The children would be expected to be in there, and there is a child spirit who likes to latch on to people and take them around the C wing or the women's wing. I'm presuming they mean the women's wing in 1821, when that was first built under the new sort of rules of segregation and all of that. But then apparently there's also a cheeky male spirit in the male wing that likes blondes and likes dragging them into his cell. And they've challenged me with seeing if I can work out which cell it is sometimes. So
sometimes all you gotta do is ask them. Like, you don't even have to ask the humans, just ask the spirits. So which cell is it? They'll tell you.
Yeah, but that's a definite. I mean, the place itself is amazing. But what's really interesting with that one, I was watching a documentary on it last night, sort of swatting up a bit for today. And my husband leaned over me, went, "Been there?" And I went, "No, you haven't, mate." And he goes, "I have." And I went, "We've never been to Lancaster." Are you sure? Yeah. And I know full well he wouldn't have gone with his family because I know the places they used to visit. And I said, "You've never been to Lancaster Castle?" And he goes, "I'm sure I've been there. I recognise it." And I'm like, "Ooh."
Traveling, yeah.
So,
See?
yeah, who knows? Who knows? Always thought he was a bit of a bad boy. So yeah.
Well, if you think about it, even as humans walking right now, we're drawn to things in our lifetime, different things. And, often if you take a moment to really think about it, it's like, why would I be drawn to, like you said, like that prison, like he said, I've been there, or, somebody's like, oh, I know that person. And they're like, no, you don't. And you say something, no, we've never met before. And it's like, but you feel that instant. So yeah, that's really one of those things.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'd do if I had been in prison somewhere and went to a prison to check it out and was like meeting my former self, my former inmate, that would be kind of trippy, I think.
Well, Julie's just put he could have been a prison officer. Nah.
No, Penny likes the idea of him being the bad boy. So.
Oh yeah, bit of a gangster. Hey. Yeah, it would be strange. I mean, I've never kind of I've been to so many places where I thought, this is me. I know this place, but I don't know why. And I've always believed in the past life thing.
Which I did not know.
No, you didn't. But the funny thing is, my sort of, I don't know. I tend to find things that I suddenly feel attracted to. I mean, I always used to be World War II. Everything was World War II. I was fascinated about World War II, especially aviation. Then I read Birdsong, and by Sebastian Faulks, which if you've never read it, it's possibly one of the most amazing books. It's set in World War One, and it tells World War One from the three people's eyes
perspective. Yeah.
So it's one of those. It's kind of history fiction, but with stuff in I learned about the tunnelers and everything else. So then I started looking into more World War One, and I can't even remember what got me into the workhouse movement. I started looking into that, and so every so often something will intrigue me, and I start looking into it. But because I'm the kind of person that doesn't just read that subject, I read everything because everything links in. It's amazing when you start seeing the overlaps.
Are you seeing what's going on with my shirt?
Yeah, you're becoming the floating head again, aren't you?
Oh yeah, but I mean I'm feeling all kinds of stuff around me right now, so this has been really interesting. And but this person, the spirit needs to back off.
They are
like big time.
Floating heading you, definitely. There we go. But the thing is, what I love doing about this, and people sometimes take me the wrong way, I'm not giving necessary opinion on whether these things were good or bad. I'm giving you context, i.e. where it's sat. And the before I forget, if anyone does want to get hold of my books, Amazon, they're on Amazon under Penny Griffiths Morgan. You can find them on there. America, Canada,
and I'll post
UK.
It. Yeah, I'll post it too.
Yeah, and if you go on my website, there's links to the books on my website, myhauntedhistories.co.uk, as there. I also have a YouTube channel which I post. I'm starting to post history videos, and when we're allowed out again, I'll be doing sort of history walks, just like short 20-30 minute ones max, nothing really onerous, just to give people a bit of a, I want to read more about that. Because I don't want to spoon feed stuff to people. I want people to look it up for themselves and learn, because I'm not going to be around forever. I can't be teaching people forever. But if I can give someone the tools to learn about stuff and find an interest in stuff, that's my job done.
Well, what I love about what you do is just that you go through a lot of different perspectives to get out there the information that you want out about different things. And, history, if you look at it when it's happening, okay, is always told by the people in power. That's the easiest way to look at it. The people that are, I'll give you an example of like some of the wars that were fought here with Native Americans. They're finding now that the cavalry officers would tell them one story, but archaeologists are going into certain areas and they're finding things that don't support what stories were told.
Yep.
And this is archaeologically speaking, this isn't like a person speaking. So oftentimes history that we learn in school is although at the time seems true, it's not. So what I love about what you do,
as well.
What I love about what you do, and I'm trying to get myself back here again. Yeah, whatever, I give up. Is you give us the perspective, but you give us different perspectives. So it's like information that's coming out now, it's your observations, it's different things. So if you guys get an opportunity, you know, follow her. She is on Haunted Histories on Facebook too, correct? And then make sure you go to her website, because if you're a history buff like I am, you will fall in love with this lady and her work. Just saying. I just, you know, I love the stuff that you're putting out and you investigate and you talk about, and it's just good stuff. It's just good stuff. What new stuff? You got new stuff coming up?
Always. I'll be recording my next podcast, because the one I've just done is with the amazing Jane Harris on a place called Leominster Priory, which again has layers and layers of history. Sounds a bit dull when you say Leominster Priory, but have a listen. You'll be shocked at what happened to her in there. I'll be speaking to the wonderful William Taboni of the Australian Paranormal Society this week to record, because we're going to be talking about Arradale Lunatic Asylum in Australia, which again has got a lot of layers to it.
I think back, and again, this is history, and here we go again. We go back to history, and the things that they would call them, and it's not even a politically correct thing with me. It's like you call it a lunatic asylum, you know? And it's like people like myself would be considered a lunatic back in the day. They'd lock us up because we heard voices if we spoke of it. So, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. The lunatic thing just kind of hit me.
Epileptics would be locked up.
Yeah.
It wasn't seen to be an actual illness. I could go into the whole asylum movement, because I've been doing quite a lot of work on that as well just recently. So I've got that coming up. I'm going to be talking about Thorn Workhouse with the guys from Are You Haunted, Phil and Sarah Wyman. I've got the two of the boys from the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. They're going to be talking about St. Albans Sanatorium. So I'm trying to mix and match lots of different places, lots of different people, to talk about a variety of things. I'm working on the next book, which is tentatively called Paranormal Playtimes, but it's about a school in Hertfordshire called the British School. And I've investigated there, and man, was it active. So I'm
kids, don't you find that
bring something?
Spirits are. I just did because y'all have been on lockdown. Excuse me. Sean and Bex have been on lockdown, so they haven't been able to go out and do their investigations for their shows. And they started to, they live on a cemetery. Okay, their house, they live in the gatehouse of the cemetery where they are.
Must be peaceful.
And it's mad. Their house is crazy, but it's fun. They've lived there for a long time. There's nothing threatening. But they went out back. Sean took like equipment, like K meters and REM pods and stuff, and they went out to the old chapel that was on the property that had been closed, right? And it's all boarded up and stuff. It's a beautiful chapel. Personally, I think the historical people should get in there and restore it. It's amazing. But when he sat down, we said, "What's that over there?" And he said, "Well, that's the children's part of the cemetery where children are buried." So they started doing some stuff, and I said, "Sean, you need to," because I was on the feed with him, and I said, you need to go over to the cemetery part where the kids are. And he was like, "Well, you know, I don't want to be disrespectful." I go, No. There's a bench there. You need to go sit on the bench and call the kids to you." And bam, he did it. And man, his meters were all going off. The REM pods were going off. I said, the kids are excited because there haven't been anybody in the cemetery to pay attention.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about schools, that's amazing stuff.
Yeah. Well, this place is, I mean, it's not owned by any big sort of company or anything like that. It's a trust that owns it. This type of school, a lot of them have been pulled down. It was one of the original types of schools for the poor kids who couldn't afford an education. got an amazing background to it. The guy who devised this method of education he's kind of one of those Marmite, well, English people will get that joke, but Marmite, you either love him or hate him. Personally, I think he sounds like a bit of a Wally, but he was incredibly good at what he did. And they sort of said, I said, why has nobody ever written a book about some of the hauntings here? And they went, nobody's ever offered. Do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, okay. Unfortunately, that's been pushed back a bit because I can't get in there to do the rest of the investigations I want to do with the lockdown. So I'm working on a lot of background stuff. And then I'll get to go into the archives when I can to validate some of the things that I've found.
Fun.
Constantly putting new blogs up. I'm also starting to sort of map out my next book that I'll probably work on next year, which is going to be on workhouses.
How do you do it? I mean, you're a full-time mom. You have a job. You know, you're a full-time wife, and you do all your shows. How do you keep up with the writing?
Don't do housework. Yeah, I only clean the house if people are coming round. So people have to give me 12 hours notice. It's my I suppose it's what makes me relax. I enjoy it. You know, some people I don't know how I find the time. I mean, that's one of the things I always ask Richard Estep. It's like, how do you find the time to do a full-time job as a paramedic or a paramedic, head of the paramedics, and you're a husband? He doesn't have children, but he's out all the time. He's doing all paracons. And he said, you find time. And you do find time. I mean, there are some days that I just go, nope, I'm exhausted. I might read a book instead. But then what I find is, even if I'm sitting there watching a documentary about something, or my latest blog factors in Wonder Woman, the 2017 Wonder Woman film, because I got inspiration from that, something I'd seen, and I thought, yes, that's a blog. So I suppose I never switch off. I'm always
I love
thinking.
that story. The Wonder Woman, if you go back to the origins of how that all came about, and I'm not going to tell anybody because
that's not what my blog's about. It's about the baddie who's one of the baddies who's in the recent Wonder Woman film.
Okay, I haven't seen
and
it yet,
how fiction and fact can sometimes, but be slightly different. So yeah, it's I never stop. But that's again, as I say, for me, it's what recharges me. And as somebody's just put, if you have a desire, you make a way. Yes, I love it. I enjoy it. But one thing I want everyone to look up on prisons, it's a Cuban prison called the Presidio Modelo. And if you want what they call the panopticon designs, where you'd have a control tower and then all the cells around it, so you only need one or two officers and they can see every cell and no prisoner knows if they're watching them. Read up on the Presidio Modelo. It looks like something out of science fiction. It's fascinating.
I'm looking like something out of science fiction again. I'm not even going to go there. I'll tell you another time. But wow, here we go. And I said this was going to happen. An hour went by so freaking quick. So I want to invite you back another time when your schedule allows, because I know you're crazy busy, but I'd love to have you back. And, you know, we just pick each other's brains with stuff. And it's good for people to hear about all the different things that are out there that, even though people can't get out and do the walkabout right now, there's a lot of things to check out in different ways, right?
Very much, very much. And read
stuff. Make sure you get her books. Penny Griffiths Morgan's on Amazon.com. Okay, make sure you get them. They're great reads, right? And if you're not sure, go check her website out. It's going across the bottom here, and contact her. She's over on Haunted History. She's got her own Facebook group and page, and check her out.
Address is on the website.
And if you can't find her,
YouTube channel, please, as well.
Yep. And if you can't find her, holler at me. Yep. Oh, and yeah, you're right. Your YouTube channel. So yeah, follow her over there too. So, and if you can't find her, find the bear. I'll direct you in the right direction.
We've known each other a while, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. But it's been good, and I really appreciated you coming on today. I really needed this today. So I appreciate it. But I always love talking to you. We could talk for hours.
We do, don't we?
So I love you, everybody. And Miss Penny, thank you so much for coming on with us. Okay?
You're very welcome.
Bye, babes. Thank you for tuning in today. And remember to tune in again next time here on Spiritually Paranormal. Remember also to share, like, and subscribe and become part of a growing family on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. My name is Bear Medicine Walker, and I approve of this message.